Hello and welcome to Learning Highcharts by Pact Publishing. Zolt Gear and Jonathan Wong have put this course together for you. I am Paul Bailey, your voiceover artist, and I would be Zolt's voice for this course. Zolt started as a classic web designer many years ago, and after getting a lot of experience, he became a successful front-end developer. He's a big fan of new web technologies, and has written tutorials about advanced HTML5 advertising formats and articles about using Highcharts. This course is aimed at users who have minimal knowledge about programming, but have some basic knowledge of web development and using technologies such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript would be an advantage, though not essential. For example, if you are a journalist, blogger or designer and want to create charts without learning to write a lot of code, well, this course will suit you. However, this course should also provide a good introduction to developers with a significant knowledge of web development and want to learn how to build interactive Highcharts. We will use real-world examples to help demonstrate the key features of using Highcharts effectively to you. We will see the fun and exciting tips on how to enhance your charts to be more visually appealing to your users. We will start with a brief overview on Highcharts so that you understand its capabilities and then move on to setting up your first chart. You'll understand how to use key Highcharts features and its layout options effectively. And we'll begin to look more in depth at the different Highchart options and how to configure charts using these options. Next, we'll examine how Highcharts supports a range of different chart types and how users' data can be displayed in a meaningful way. In section 5, we'll start to look at how Highcharts can read different data formats, read from different types of sources, and how you can drill down and filter data from different sources. We'll then focus on how to handle input from the user, specifically how to handle different events that are fired within a chart. Next, we'll examine the various ways in which we can distribute our charts. Lastly, we'll look at developing Highcharts for mobile platforms. So I hope that prepares you a little for what's to come. Now that we have a clear idea of what's in store for us, let's start with the first section of this course, Introduction to Highcharts. In this section, we'll have a brief overview of what Highcharts exactly is. Also, we'll scour through its website and create our first chart. Let's begin our first video on getting started with Highcharts. Here we will understand the importance of Highcharts and take a look at what Highcharts has in store for us. So, what exactly is Highcharts? Highcharts is a JavaScript library that allows you to implement highly interactive and dynamic charts inside your web applications. Highcharts makes it easy for users to add simple to complex interactive charts to their website or web applications, and has cool features, such as the ability to zoom into parts of your chart. A Highchart supports a wide range of chart types. Many of these charts can be easily customized, allowing you to do such things as include multiple series in one chart, display multiple charts in one graph, use the same data in multiple charts, create custom tooltips, and so on. Highcharts can help you create pretty much any type of chart combination you want. So, why should you use Highcharts? There are several great reasons why you should use Highcharts. Firstly, Highcharts helps you produce highly appealing and professional-looking charts. As a result, it is used by tens of thousands of developers and is used by 59 out of the world's 100 largest companies and big-name companies such as Facebook and Twitter. Secondly, it has been written in pure HTML5 and JavaScript. This means you can display charts made with Highcharts natively in your web browser without using any plugins, so no need to worry about installing plugins such as Adobe Flash or Microsoft Silverlight. Thirdly, it works in all modern mobile and desktop browsers, including iPhone, iPad. On iOS and Android, multi-touch support provides a seamless user experience. If you take a look through the Highcharts products page, you'll see additional features of interest. Highcharts provides a range of support for users. The Highcharts support page allows you to sign up to a support forum where you can post your general Highcharts technical queries. If you have more specific technical or programming query, you can post your queries to the Stack Overflow website. Or you can also contact Highcharts directly and get specific maintenance support. If you're more of a technical kind of user, Highcharts also has an excellent searchable API documentation area. The API page details every possible configuration option available to set up a chart. Don't worry too much about what APIs at this stage, as we'll be covering the power of APIs in much more detail in a later tutorial. Highcharts has a wide range of useful plugins that can be used to enhance your charts. You can search for a plugin of interest. You can even create and test your own plugin. The best way to learn how to use Highcharts is to interact with the demos. Highcharts has an excellent demos site which you can check out. On this page, you can view the complete range of Highcharts available, as well as the different options that can be applied to the charts. You can view the different type of options for a particular chart by clicking on the subsections for a chart type. In this example, we are looking at the line chart with data labels attached option. You can also drill into the details of the chart by clicking on the View Options and preview the Highcharts configuration settings for the graph you are viewing. You can further experiment with the chart you are viewing by directly editing the code for that chart and viewing those changes by clicking on Edit in JS Fiddle button. This about wraps it up for this brief overview of the Highcharts website. In this video, we have learned what Highcharts is and how we can learn more about it through its website. In the next video, we will learn how we can set up our first chart and configure its basic options. In this video, we'll be jumping right into creating a basic chart using Highcharts. In the previous video, we have learned what Highcharts is and how we can learn more about it through its website. We will start by looking at the basic requirements for setting up your first chart, such as the type of browsers is required, the editor used for editing the code, and the recommended JavaScript frameworks to use. Next, we'll download and look at the files and folders that come with the download. We'll then see how you can install Highcharts by setting up the key JavaScript code required in your HTML page for Highcharts to run. And finally, we will create our first chart by showing you the code to set up a basic chart on your HTML page. Now, let's get started. There are some basic requirements that we need prior to using the Highcharts software. To know what these requirements are, we need to go to the System Requirements page on the Highcharts site for more information. This page will give you exact information about the type and version of web browser that works best with Highcharts. It also gives you other useful information, such as the types of JavaScript frameworks that Highcharts supports, as well as their versions. Next, we'll need a code editor for editing our code. There are lots of popular text editors you can choose from: Sublime Text, Notepad++, Brackets, or Atom. If you haven't got any favourite, I suggest you start with using Atom Text Editor. It's a popular, open source, easy to use editor and has a strong community behind it. I also like its code beautifying feature. Go to the Atom website and download it by selecting the relevant download file for your operating system. Our next step is for us to select a JavaScript framework to use with our Highcharts. A JavaScript library is a library of pre-written JavaScript, which allows us for easier development of JavaScript-based applications. There are various JavaScript frameworks we could use, and this is part of why using Highcharts is attractive. It's due to its flexibility with working on different JavaScript frameworks. For example, we could either use the jQuery framework, or the MootTools framework, or the Prototype framework. For the examples in this course, we'll be using the jQuery framework. And that's because it's one of the most popular JavaScript frameworks being used. On the Downloads page, right-click on the Download Link Compressed Production jQuery under the jQuery 1.x section. Save this JS file in the JS folder of your web application. The next step is for us to download the Highcharts file. Go to the Highcharts download page. Right-click on the Highcharts download button and save the zip file to your desktop. Once you've extracted the files, go into the Highcharts folder. Double-click on the index.html file. This loads up a complete list of all the different chart types you can use. You can click on any of these links to view the chart type. If you go back into the folder and go into the example folder, you can locate the HTML file for each chart type. You can open up the HTML page in your editor and see the complete code for setting up that chart type. This is a great way to experiment with the code. It's always useful to view the latest bug fixes and new features. This can save you a lot of time during the development process. To do this, check out the changelog page. Now, we're going to look at installing Highcharts to your web page. In this simple example, we'll be looking at an HTML page with some Highcharts JavaScript code inserted to allow us to set up a basic bar chart. Two important files we need to include in our HTML page are the jQuery JavaScript file and the Highcharts JavaScript file. On this line, we have included a link to the jQuery JS file. Next, we have a link to the Highcharts JS file. Notice that these URLs are loaded externally by using a content delivery network link. In this case, from the ajax.googleapis.com and code.highcharts.com websites respectively. The advantage of using a content delivery network external link is that it can help pages load faster and reduce the strain on your web server by offloading the jQuery and Highcharts files to an external server. However, if you want to run these scripts locally in your application, you can grab the same files from the jQuery website and the Highcharts JS file from the code.highcharts.com site. You then put these files into your local JS folder used to hold your JavaScript files. If you're using these files locally, your URLs should look like the code on lines 11 and 16, which I've commented out in this example. Here, I've added in the main JavaScript code for setting up our bar chart. Note that the JavaScript code is embedded within the opening script tag and the closing script tag, and the code resides within the opening and closing head tag area in the HTML page. What we have here are the basic configuration settings for setting up a bar chart. Let's walk through the code by focusing on the parts of the code you need to configure for your chart. The first part you need to configure is defining the type of chart you want. This information is located in the Chart code section here. You can see that this type is described as a bar-for-bar chart and is shown as a string variable. If you wanted a pie chart using the current data and labels, all you need to do is rename the type bar to pie, and you've instantly changed your chart. You can also change the X and Y axis labels, also shown as string variable. For example here, we specify the X-axis categories. These are listed in square brackets and separated by commas for each category you add. On this line, we can put a label describing the Y-axis under the title code section. Under the series code section, we have code that describes the data labels and data being represented. For example, we have the data label James here under the code section in single quotes. The data for James is represented in the data code section on this line. Finally, we've added the div to the web page. The div is a container unit that encapsulates other page elements and divides the HTML document into sections. In this div, or particular section of the HTML page, we will place our chart. We give this div an ID and set a specific width and height, which will define the width and height of the chart. You'll notice that what we've created is a pretty basic chart with some basic configuration settings. But you'll soon find out that all Highcharts graphs share the same fundamental configuration structure. In later videos, we'll look at how to create more sophisticated graphs through configuration settings. Now we've come to the end of this video. This was a brief intro into creating your first chart. In this introduction section, we explored the Highcharts website to learn about what Highcharts is and how we can use it. Later, we'll create our first chart. In the next section, we will look at the details of how to configure Highcharts features and layouts. Welcome to this section 2 of the course on configuring Highcharts features and layouts. In our previous section, we had a brief introduction to Highcharts, and we learned how to create our first chart. In this section, we will start by having a brief overview of the key components that go into making up a standard chart. Then, we'll look at the Highcharts code implementation of these key components. Specifically, we will be looking at implementing and configuring the title and subtitle axes, data series, and the legend. We then move on to examining how Highcharts lays out and positions its chart in your web applications by default and how we can configure those settings. Next, we'll cover plot options, briefly do an overview of different color settings for a chart. Now, let's get started. In this video, we'll cover the basic chart structure so that you're familiar with the components that constitute a chart. Let's briefly look at the key components of a standard chart. In this image from the Highcharts site, we can see the main features of any standard chart. At the top, we have the title. It usually appears above the main graphic and also provides a succinct description of what the data in the graph refers to. The dimensions in the data are often displayed on the axes. If a horizontal and vertical axis are used, they are usually referred to as the x-axis and y-axis respectively. Each axis will have a scale, denoted by regular graduations, and usually accompanied by numerical or categorical indications. Each axis will typically have a label displayed outside or beside it, describing the dimension represented. If the scale is numerical, the label will often be suffixed with the unit of that scale in parenthesis. In this image of a sample temperature chart, that unit would be the degrees centigrade unit. Within the graph, a grid of lines may appear to aid the visual alignment of data. The grid can be enhanced by visually emphasizing the lines at regular points. The lines are then called major grid lines, and the remainder are minor grid lines. The data of a chart can appear in a variety of formats, such as textual labels, dots, shapes, etc. When the data appearing in the chart contains multiple variables, the chart may include a legend, also known as a key. A legend contains a list of variables appearing in the chart and an example of their appearance. This information allows the data from each variable to be identified in the chart. So, we've come to the end of this video. We've briefly reviewed how a generic chart is constructed. In the next video, we'll look at how Highcharts implements those features by looking at its code implementation. Welcome back to the second video of this section, configuring the title, subtitle, and axes of your chart. Now we've established the generic structure of a standard chart, let's go into more depth on each of these components by looking at their code representation in Highcharts. By understanding where you need to place code, you can configure the title and subtitle of a chart. We will also look at the axis labels, tick marks, and grid lines. They are closely linked and all scale together. Let's start by looking at the Highcharts code to describe the title and subtitle of a chart. Here we can see code to set up the title and subtitle for this chart. The title and subtitle can also be moved around by a variety of layout settings such as align, float, margin, vertical align, and so on. For all available options, check out the Highcharts API page. In this example, both the title and the subtitle have been aligned to the left of the chart. By default, the floating setting is set to false. When set to true, the plot area will not move to make space for the title. In other words, true the title on top of the plot area. Let's change the title setting to false and see what happens. Now you can see that the title no longer sits on top of the chart. You can also align the title. The horizontal alignment of the title can be either left, center, or right. Currently, I have it set to align left. Change the alignment to center and you should see it align to the center of the chart. The X and Y settings specify the location of the title. You can change these settings to see how the title gets repositioned. Next, we'll look at configuring the axes of the chart. In this image, we see how the axis labels, tick marks, and grid lines are represented. The axis labels, tick marks, and grid lines are closely linked and all scale together. Their positioning is always calculated in Highcharts to best fit the data present in the chart, even when the image is resized. If we look at the tick marks, we see them as lines placed along the axis to show the units of measurement. The spacing between ticks is decided by the tick interval options. For example, we have minor tick interval configuration option set to 5. On the graph, we can see the horizontal lines marking out the minor tick intervals. The major tick intervals represented by the bold lines. If we change the tick setting to 10, notice that the tick spacing increases. We can also add a minimum and maximum value to both axes. For example, if we add min 3 and max 10 to the x-axis, it will automatically adjust the viewable number of categories on the x-axis. If we add a minimum and maximum value to the y-axis, we can see that in this example, it will try to adjust the ticks so that it best fits the visible area. In this video, we learned about adjusting basic configuration options such as title, subtitle, and axes. In the next video, we will look into implementing data series and legend manipulation. Welcome to video 3 on data series, legend, layout, and color settings. In our previous video, we looked at how we can adjust basic configuration options such as title, subtitle, and axes. Now, let's look at how we can represent our data in a chart. In a standard chart, a dataset is represented as a series. A data series refers to the sets of values that are going to be on the chart, be it a line chart, a bar chart, a pie chart, etc. Different types of charts can work with different kinds of series. Highcharts will detect what data you have chosen and define it into series for the purpose of being on the chart. You can do things like give names to the series or set colors for them, or put titles and legends on the charts for them, and lots of other things. There are 3 different ways of setting up a data series. Firstly, the series can be represented as a list of numerical values. An example would be where values are separated by commas. Next, the data will be represented as pairs. An example would be like this, where value pairs are in square brackets separated by commas. The final representation is a list of objects with named values. Let's look at these approaches in a bit more detail. Now, let's open up dataseries1.html, dataseries2.html, dataseries3.html, and datalabels.html using code editor. A series is a set of data, for example, a line graph or set of columns. As mentioned earlier, there are 3 ways to represent data series in Highcharts. Let's see them in action. In this HTML example, we have a single list of numerical values, which will be represented as Y values. The X values in this example will be represented as categories of months as shown here. In the next HTML example, the data series is represented as pairs, separated by square brackets. The first value of the pair will represent the X value, and the second value will represent the Y value. In the final HTML example, we have a list of objects with named values. Putting data into objects gives us much more control over each piece of data. If we look here, we have an object called point1, and it has a color attribute and a Y value of 5. In the next example, we have enabled the data labels configuration by setting the enabled setting to true. This allows data labels to be displayed for each point of data in a series on the chart. The final feature we will look at is the legend component of a chart. Let's open up legend customized.html file in our code editor. The legend displays the series in a chart with a predefined symbol, such as a square or circle and the name of the series. The series can be disabled and enabled from the legend. Here, I've set a range of different configuration settings that can access from the Legend Configuration section of the Highcharts API page. For example, I aligned the legend to the right side of the chart, and vertically aligned the legend to be at the top of the chart. Now, let's change the background color of the label by typing in this line of code. Background color : single quote hash FCFFC5 single quote. Now, let's give it a border and color, and we do this by typing in this line of code. Border color : single quote hash C98657 single quote. Next, let's change the legend border width by typing in this line of code. Border width : 1. Now, let's add the border radius. Border radius : 4. I've now given the legend a background color, a border width, and border radius. Notice how easy it is to add a configuration setting, but notice that we're adding it in a list fashion to the legend code segment, which begins here, and separating each configuration with a comma. To access a comprehensive list of customization settings, go to the Highcharts API site. For example, type in the search box the word legend. A long drop-down list of options will appear. Scroll down and select the Legend background color option. You can read information about this setting, but I find it much easier to understand the feature by clicking on the Try It link, which opens up a live demo exhibiting the feature in JS Fiddle, allowing you to directly test the code. We've just looked at the components that go into making up a chart. However, we also need to consider how the chart itself is laid out and positioned on your web page. This diagram from Highcharts shows the main regions where Highcharts elements can be positioned using X and Y values relative to the top left corner and using the Align and Vertical Align options. The Align option can have the values left, right, and center. The Vertical Align option can have the values top, bottom, and middle. Let's look at an example where we define the height and width of a chart. Let's open layout height width.html in our code editor. Here, we've set the height of the chart to be 350 pixels and the width to be 500 pixels. Let's change the width of the chart to 700 pixels. In the next example, we have a margin top setting set to 100 pixels. Let's change that setting to 50 and see the effect. In this example, we have a margin left set to 100 pixels. In this example, we have a margin right set to 100 pixels. In this example, we have a margin bottom set to 100 pixels. In this example, we have a spacing left set to 100 pixels. In this example, we have a spacing bottom set to 100 pixels. Now, open up Plot Options Series Data Labels.html in Code Editor. The Plot Options is a wrapper object for configuring options for each series type. Examples of series type are area, area spline, bar, column, pie, scatter, spline gauge, and range. These configurations have properties such as plotOptions.series, which is used for common plotting options shared by the whole series. Let's look at an example of plot options configuration. We're going to look at the plotOptions.series.dataLabels. Here we have the plot options, enable the data labels to be viewable, and we do this by setting the enabled setting to be true. We provide the styling for each of those data labels, such as their background color, border width, border color, and so on. Note that Plot Options configures the defaults settings for the whole of the data series. However, Plot Options can be overridden, and we can see an example of this here. Notice that the data label for the 543.2 is different from all the other data labels. It has a purple border. We can see this data label configuration for data value 543.2. It has settings for border color, border width that has different values than the one described in the plot series. If we look at this in the chart, we see that the visual properties for that data point are different from the rest of the data series. Highcharts allows you to override the plot options and is useful for unique cases like this example where you want to highlight a data label that is different from the rest of the series. Now, let's look at how Highcharts deals with color. Let's open background color.html in Code Editor. Highcharts supports solid and semi-transparent colors, as well as linear and radial gradients. This applies to all the color options in the Highcharts API list, such as border color, background color, line color, etc. It also supports solid colors given in the hex format. For example, we have a color with hex value. It also supports RGB colors. Semi-transparent colors in Highcharts are given in the RGBA format. For example, RGBA and 4 numbers. The first 3 numbers represent the red, green and blue parameters respectively. The last parameter is the alpha or opacity that ranges from 0, which means that the color is fully transparent, to 1, which means the color transparency is fully opaque. We've come to the end of this section. We've briefly reviewed how a generic chart is constructed. We then looked at how Highcharts implements those features by looking at its code implementation. This was followed by examining how Highcharts lays out and positions your chart in your web page. Next, we looked at plot options and how we can configure objects for each series type and override those settings. And finally, we covered color settings in Highcharts, looking at a few examples such as setting up a linear gradient. In the next section, we will look at configuring Highcharts with more options and covering existing features such as animation, 3D, tooltips and more. Join me there. In this section, we will build on the knowledge from the previous section, where we looked at the fundamentals of structuring and building a chart. We will look at the extra options that can be used to build more advanced charts. We start by developing tooltips, label and string formatting. Tooltips can display useful information about a data point in the graph when a user hovers the mouse over that point, such as how to style a tooltip, creating custom tooltips, and adding content to tooltips. We then look at ways to style and format labels and strings. We'll examine how plot lines and plot bands are used to help a user focus on an important region of a chart. We'll also see how to zoom in on a chart. This is useful for the user who wants to examine part of a chart's data series in more detail by zooming on a chart region. We then look at 3D charts, seeing how to format and create 3D column charts, 3D pie charts, and 3D scatter charts examples. We move on to animation and how this feature can be enabled and how we can use different animation types that are available. Finally, we look at how we can have several data series in one chart. In this video, we'll look at tooltips, labels, and string formatting. Tooltips are a great way to provide information about a user interface feature or an item in the drawing area, for instructions on what to do next. Often, information can be very dense in a chart, and tooltips provide a way to reveal necessary information when the user interacts with the chart. Because the coding used to enable tooltips is similar to the code used to describe the labels and string formatting, we will also cover those features in this video. If we want specific information about a data point on a data series, we can move our mouse over a data point and get some information about that particular data point. A tooltip appears when hovering over a data point in a chart. The tooltip shows the values of the point and the name of the series. Let's look at an example. Here we have the code to describe our tooltip. The point format setting describes the series.name variable, which picks up the series names. In this example, they are grp1 and grp2. The point.y variable then picks up the data from each of the series. For those that recognize HTML, you should recognize these tags are basic HTML tags. This closing bracket b bracket tag says format the variable with a bold setting, and this br/tag starts a new line. Next, we specify the background color. We give the tooltip data as data format suffix of cm, which stands for centimeters. I've also added a border width and border radius to style the tooltip. Finally, I have a shared setting. When the tooltip is shared, the entire plot area will capture mouse movement. Let's take a look at how we can format strings and labels in our charts. Format strings are templates for labels, where variables are inserted. Let's look at a few examples. In this example, we'll be adding units to y-axis label. Here, we specify how we are going to format our labels using the point format setting. The variables are inserted within the curly bracket notation. In this case, the variable value represents the values of the y-axis. Each label generated is then appended the suffix millimeters. What it's saying is format this point so that the y value, the variable value represented by the y-axis point.y, is set to 2 decimal places, as represented by the .2f configuration after the colon symbol. Note, the point format allows some HTML to also be included. We can see in this example the HTML tags for format bolding the text for the label in the tooltip. We've come to the end of this video. We've covered how tooltips are constructed and how they can be styled. We've also looked at how labels can be formatted for data use. In the next video, we will focus on the plot bands, plot lines, and zoom features. Hello, and welcome to Plot Lines, Plot Bands, and Zoom feature video. In the previous video, we covered how tooltips are constructed and how they are styled. We also looked at how labels can be formatted for data use. In this video, we're going to cover the use of plot bands and plot lines, as well as the zooming feature in Highcharts. We'll start by looking at what plot bands and plot lines are for when working with charts. Next, we'll look at code examples for them. Finally, we'll look at how to enable and configure Highcharts' zooming feature. Plot bands and plot lines serve similar purposes, which is to highlight certain areas of a chart. Both plot bands and plot lines have the option settings of color, events, ID, label, and z-index. The lines and bands will always be perpendicular to the x or y axis, in which it is defined within. Plot bands and plot lines helps the user to focus on particular parts of a data series. The easiest way to do this is through the use of color. So for this example of a plot band, I've highlighted a region of the chart with the color grey, as you can see here. Navigate to the region of code which starts with plot bands. Before we look at the code held within plot bands section, notice that the plot bands code resides in the x-axis of the section of the code. This means that plot band will work on the x-axis only. Okay, back to the plot bands section of the code. This is where we define the color setting. The from setting specifies where the plot band starts, which in this case start at position 4 on the x-axis. This happens to coincide with the month of May. Notice the positions start at the midpoint, not the start of position 4. The to setting is set where the plot band ends. In this case, it is position 8, which on the chart is the month of September. Let's switch to the code for plot lines. Effectively, the code is identical to plot band, with the exception that you don't specify the start and end points. Instead, you specify the width value, which in this case is set to 2 pixels for your plotline. And we set the value, which in this case is set to a single value 3, which in this case on our x-axis is the midpoint of the month of April. Highcharts has a nice feature that allows you to zoom in to specific areas of data charts. This is especially useful if you have a very complex data series and you want to examine a section of the chart in a bit more detail. First thing we need to do is specify which axis you want to zoom in on. So here we have the code setting for zoom type set to X, which represents the x-axis. Let's look at an example where we zoom in on the x-axis only. Now, let's open our file in a browser to see the zooming feature with this set up. The way to zoom is to click and drag your mouse pointer. The great feature in Highcharts is that it allows users of touch devices to zoom by pinching in the chart area. On these devices, the user may also move the zoomed area by panning with one finger across the chart. If we wanted a zoom effect on the y-axis, we would use the letter Y, and if we wanted both the x and y-axis, we would use XY for the zoom type setting. Let's change the zoom type to Y and see the effect. Let's change the zoom type to XY and see the difference. This concludes our video on plot bands, plot lines and zooming. Next, we'll turn our attention to 3D charts. Welcome to video 3.3 on 3D charts, animation and multiple data series. In the previous video, we saw plot bands, plot lines and zooming. In this video, we will look at how to load the required files and configure for viewing 3D charts. Next, we see how the animation feature works in action. And finally, we set up a chart with multiple data series. 3D charts provide an additional way for your viewers to examine your data. Highcharts is capable of creating 3D charts. However, it does require a module to be added called Highcharts 3D. This module allows the user to create 3D column charts, 3D pie charts, and 3D scatter charts. To access the Highcharts 3D, you need to add this line of code after your Highcharts JS code. Next, we need to configure our chart. Note, the code used to generate the 3D chart does not interfere with the code to generate your normal 2D chart. In other words, 3D charts are able to happily coexist next to your regular charts. Let's look at an example for a 3D column chart. There are various key settings that need to be configured. These are set within the Options 3D configuration setting. First setting we need to configure is whether the chart is 3D or not. We can do this by adding Options 3D enabled :true to the chart options, like shown here. Currently, it is set to true. If it was set to false, we would simply revert back to a standard column chart without any 3D effect. Next, we set the alpha and beta setting. The alpha and beta settings define the angles to rotate the view of the chart. The depth settings sets the total depth of the chart, and this defaults to 100. Here, the view distance setting of 50 defines how far a viewer is from the chart. Notice for the pie, we don't use the depth setting. Here, we have an example of a scatter plot. With 3D charts, we can define a frame around the charts by defining a bottom, front and back panel. We can see an example of these settings with a framed column chart. Here, we can configure the size setting for bottom, front, and back of the frame, as well as the color. We may decide that we want to switch back to a standard chart without the 3D effect. For this, there is no need to create a new chart. Simply change the enabled setting from true to false. Let's see the effect. As you can see, the columns are presented as isometric shapes in an angle that was configured by the alpha, beta, depth and distance parameters. Notice how easy that was? Next, let's take a look at another appealing feature in Highcharts: animation. Animation is a useful tool to help visualize change. This is particularly useful when demonstrating a change between two data series. The initial animation configuration can be specified through plot options. The animation property can have a duration which is the time in milliseconds to complete the animation. To trigger this effect, a button has been set up. Don't worry too much about the code in the button at the moment. What it does is basically changes the first data point in the series. This triggers an animation effect which lasts for the duration of 1500 milliseconds. This is a toggle button, which means if you click it again, it will toggle back to the chart's original state. As you can see, Charts has a nice animation effect every time you click on the toggle button. You can experiment with this setting. The higher the number, the longer the animation effect. In other words, it slows the animation down. Let's contrast this without an animation setting. Replace the code. Observe the effect. As you can see, it has a more jarring effect. It's less smooth and has a jarring effect. And this basically covers most of what we need to know about animation in Highcharts. Quite often in the chart, we need to compare different data series against each other in order to draw necessary conclusion about the meaning of the data. Let's open multiple series.html in our code editor. In Highcharts, we can display additional data in a separate series array. The series arrays are just lists of data with a name. In this example, we have a column chart. Within the series section, we have two series listed here. One is the name label called Group 1, and the second series has a name label called Group 2. Each has its own data series. Let's add in a third series with this code. Remember, if we are adding to a list of features, we need to include a comma. Now what we want to display is multiple charts in one graph. With this example, let's add an extra line to the third series we just created. Add the following line. Type : single quote pi, single quote, comma, before the data series shown in square brackets. This basically overrides the default chart setting, which is currently set as a column chart in this example, and sets the third series to be displayed as a pie chart. We have now come to the end of this section. We've covered a lot. We looked at different ways we can examine our chart data by creating and styling custom tooltips. We then looked at ways to focus the user's attention to particular important regions of a chart by the plot lines and plot bands. We showed how users can zoom in on charts for closer inspection of a chart data series. We then looked at labels and string formatting that allowed us to custom the look of our labels and strings. We then looked at 3D charts and how to implement and customize them. Next, we looked at enhancing our chart's appeal by setting up animation on a chart. Finally, we ended by looking at how we can set up multiple data series on a single chart. In the next section, we will look at how Highcharts support a range of different chart types, such as line, area, and scatter charts, bar and column charts, pie charts, and so on. Welcome to a brand new section on charts and series types. Up until the last section, we explored the different Highcharts options, layouts, and features. In this section of videos, we will be covering a range of basic chart types, such as chart lines, area charts, column and bar charts, pie charts, and not to forget scatter and bubble charts. This will give you an insight of constructing and customizing basic charts, and hopefully give you the confidence to try out more advanced chart types. For a full selection of charts and advanced chart types, check out the chart demo site at www.highcharts.com/demo. In this first video, we will tackle the line, scatter, and bubble charts. A line chart or line graph is a type of chart which displays information as a series of data points that are connected by straight line segments. Line charts are most often used to visualize data that changes over time. For example, in finance, a line chart can be used to connect a series of past prices together with a line. Let's open line-chart.html in our code editor. We've actually looked at this line chart in a previous example, but let's open up line-chart.html and quickly look at a line chart, as its structure reflects much of the same structure in other charts. So let's see this as a quick refresher. First, we'll define the type of chart we are setting up. In this case, the chart type is set to line for a line chart. We have code for the title and subtitle here. Next, we have the code that defines the x-axis categories here. Note that all the text labels require quote marks around them. Next, we'll describe the y-axis info. Again, it requires a title. We can set the scale of the y-axis to scale differently. For example, if we type in this code, we've now set the y-axis to have a logarithmic code with a minor tick interval of 0.1. Now, let's encode information for the tooltip that appears when we move our mouse over the data point in the series. In this example, we've just set the value suffix. Next, we'll set up the legend info. This info can be how it's laid out, how it's aligned, and so on. Finally, let's enter it, the series data information. We've got two series here, Group 1 and Group 2. If we want to change out line chart to step chart, we could include the line of code for Group 1 series. This aligns the data points to the left of the step, but we can set it to be center or right. Now, let's look at a scatter plot. In a scatter plot, the data is displayed as a collection of points, each having the value of one variable, determining the position on the horizontal axis, and the value of the other variable determining the position on the vertical axis. The first thing we need is to set the chart type to scatter. We'll skip the part of the plot options of the code, as you should be familiar with the early part of the code. I've added the code marker enabled true, close curly bracket. This enhances the data point when the mouse hovers over that data point. This is particularly useful if you have hundreds or thousands of data points and you need to isolate a particular data point from the mass of other data points. For the tooltip, I specified the header format and the point format. In the header format, I've set it in a manner that it picks up the series name. which in this case is called grp1. For the point format, I've linked that part of the tooltip to each point from each data pair. This is shown as point.x and point.y respectively. Bubble charts can be considered a variation of the scatter plot, in which the data points are replaced with bubbles. A bubble chart is a type of chart that displays 3 dimensions of data. Each entity with its triplet v1, v2, v3 of associated data is plotted as a disk that expresses 2 of the vi values through the disk's xy location and the third through its size. You can see this in the data series section. Unlike the scatter chart data, which comes in pairs, it now comes in triplets. First, we need to include the line of code different to the other charts. Next, let's set the chart type to bubble. I've also set the zoom type to XY. To recap, the zoom type allows you to zoom in on the region of the chart by dragging your mouse over the chart area. The XY setting allows you to zoom in along the XY axis. This is useful in bubble charts as you can zoom in on the bubbles which differ in size. I've come to the end of this video where we went through line, area and scatter charts. In the next video, we're going to cover area and area spline charts. In this video, we will be covering area charts and area spline charts. In the previous video, we covered line, area and scatter charts. An area chart is a line chart with the areas below the lines filled with colours. We use the area chart for showing trends over time among related attributes. The area chart is like the plot chart except that the area below the plotted line is filled with a colour to indicate volume. Let's open area-chart.html in our code editor. First, we'll set the chart type to be area type. In the x-axis section, we have a line of code called formatter. This JavaScript function is used to format the label. Its value is given by this.value. If we look at the plot-options, we have a piece of code called pointStart. If no x values are given for the points in a data series, pointStart defines on what value to start. For example, if a series contains one yearly value starting from 2000, we set pointStart to 2000. Let's examine the section of code called marker. Currently, it's set to false. If we set it to true, we can see it does look quite good on this type of chart. Let's set it back to false. Let's set the symbol to square. Notice, if we hover over the chart, the marker appears as a square. That doesn't look good either. Now, it looks much better as we move our mouse over the data points. You can invert your chart along the different axes. Add in the line inverted : true. Let's open area chart negative values.html. Wait a minute. What happens when we have negative values in our data series? You can see that Highcharts copes with this as well. It automatically creates an area chart with both positive and negative values. Now, Let's open area spline chart.html in our code editor. The area spline chart is the same as area chart, except the line is a spline instead of straight lines. First, let's set the chart type to be area spline. The rest of the code is very similar to the area chart code. However, look at the plot options section of the code. Here, we are specifying the fill opacity of the area spline series. A low value makes the series color more transparent, allowing you to see different data series overlay each other. We've come to the end of this video. In this video, we have learned about area and area spline charts. Now, let's move on to bar and column charts in the next video. In this video, we'll be covering bar and column charts. In the previous video, we covered area charts and area spline charts. This video will cover the main features of bar chart, stacked bar chart, column chart, and finally column range chart. For the bar chart example, let's open barchart.html in our code editor. A bar graph is a chart that uses bars to show comparisons among categories. One axis of the chart shows the specific categories being compared, and the other axis represents a discrete value. Some bar graphs present bars clustered in groups of more than one, grouped bar graphs. For the chart type, we'll set it to be bar in order to create a bar chart. The code is very similar to the line code we saw recently. Let's preview this in the browser. Now, let's open stacked bar chart.html. A stacked bar graph is a graph that is used to compare a part of the whole. The bars in a stacked bar graph are divided into categories. Each bar represents a total. Stacked graphs should be used when the sum of the values is as important as the individual items. Stacked graphs are commonly used on bars to show multiple values of individual categories or lines to show multiple values over time. Thus, stacked graphs must always work with positive values. Now, let's have a look at the code. Notice that the chart type is still of type bar. The relevant code section we need to look at is in the plot options. There, in the series section, we have a configuration setting called stacking set to normal. The stacking setting determines whether to stack the values of each series on top of each other or not. Other possible values are null to disable, normal to stack by value, or %. Next, let's open column-chart.html in our code editor. A column chart is a graphical representation of data. Column charts display vertical bars going across the chart horizontally, with the values axis being displayed on the left side of the chart. Again, the code is similar to the bar chart. The chart is set to column. The tooltips section is more advanced than our previous example. We've now included an HTML tag as well. Use HTML to render the contents of the tooltip. Using HTML allows advanced formatting like tables and images in the tooltip. To allow this, we have to set the attribute use HTML:true. Note these three areas: header format, point format, and footer format. Have a quick look at the point padding setting in the plot options section. Point padding and plot options both control padding between each column and bar in x-axis units. Defaults to 0.1. Next, let's open column range chart HTML in our code editor. let's look at a variation of the column chart. Also, take a look at the column range chart. First, set the chart type to column range. Jump to the data section. Column range chart allows for negative numbers and creates a range chart from the negative to positive values. We've come to the end of this video. In this video, we have learnt about bar charts and column charts. In the next video, we'll move on to pie charts. Welcome to the final video of this section, where we'll be covering pie charts. In the previous video, we looked at examples of bar and column type charts and how to change their options. In this video, we're going to take a look at what is a pie chart and set up its options. A pie chart is a circular chart divided into sections, illustrating numerical proportion. In a pie chart, the arc length of each sector, and consequently its central angle and area, is proportional to the quantity it represents. Let's open piechart.html and take a look at an example of a pie chart. When you move your mouse over each segment of the pie chart, notice how each segment gets highlighted with a corresponding tooltip. This slice that looks like it's a piece of pizza is a selected slice. Notice how this slice is pulled out to distinguish it from the other slices. We'll look at the code to see how this is done shortly. See what happens when you click on a slice. It either toggles the slice back in with the rest of the slices, or pulls out the slice. Now, let's look at the code. The chart type is set to pie. The plot border width settings sets the border of the chart. It's a bit thick. I'm going to change the border width value from 5 to 3. In the section for plot options, we have allow point select : true. This allows the slice to move in and out of the pie chart when you click it. If we set this to false, this stops the desired effect. The code, pointer, we can change this to a different type, such as crosshairs. Next, we have the code section for data labels. At the moment, this is set to true, so the data labels appear next to each pie section. The format section specifies how we format the data series. If we have a look at the series section, you can see that the series comes as a pair. The first part corresponds to the name part of the point.name, and this is formatted to be bold. The second part corresponds to the percentage size. In the series section of the code, we can make a slice selected by putting that data and additional settings in curly braces. We add 2 additional lines. Sliced true, selected true. The sliced setting pulls the slice out from the rest of the pack. If the selected setting is set to true, it means the slice is initially selected, as if you had just clicked on it using your mouse, and is awaiting your next action. OK, now let's add this line of code after it. Now, we have a legend appear with our pie chart. In this section, we have learned about a number of chart types: line, scatter, and bubble charts. Next, we talked about area and spline chart. Later, we covered bar and column charts, and finally, we discussed pie charts. In the next section, we learn about how to use different kinds of data sources like XML, JSON, or CSV for working with Highcharts. Join me there. Hello and welcome to section 5, Working with Data. In the previous section, we looked at how Highcharts supports a range of different chart types and how users' data can be displayed in a meaningful way. In this section, we will examine how Highcharts can read different data series formats, how to drill down and filter data, how to fetch data from various sources, and how data is processed in Highcharts. Now we move on to the first video of this section that deals with working with different data formats. When working with charts, Highcharts can process a few data formats within the series, and by the end of this video, you will learn these formats. In this video, we are going to take a look at an example of how a list of values, a simple array, can be set as the series data. Then, we look at how an array of arrays can be used for data part of the series. And lastly, we use an array of objects for the same purpose. First, we need to set up a basic Highcharts page. For this example, we are using a column chart. Let's start defining our series. Let's add a name to it and a list of numerical values for the data in an array format. Each value represents y-axis values, and x values will be calculated automatically. Highcharts can also process multiple arrays, so let's create an array of arrays for the data. In this example, the first value is assigned to the x-axis, or the category of the chart, the second to the y-axis. The first value can be a string. In that case, Highcharts handles it as the name for the point, and the x value will be automatically calculated. This is how the array of arrays data format looks like. Now, let's see the third format type, the array of objects. Add a new series in the following format that I have pasted here. As you can see, the same values as above were used in an object type format for each point. With this type, you can assign a lot of configuration properties for data points. For example, I add a color property with a value. Let's save our file and have a look at our work. If we open our HTML in the browser, we can see three groups of columns. The blue set is created by assigning a list of values. The black has an array of arrays as a data format, and the green and pink are provided by the object list. If we hover our mouse over the three groups of columns, we can see that they represent the same values from different series data format. For example, we can see the extra pink color property we assigned for the last column. In this video, we have learned that Highcharts can process three main types of data structures: the simple value list, a more advanced list of arrays, or an array of objects, with many possibilities for configuring each point's properties. In the next video, we will learn how we can create a chart with applying Highcharts drill down module, where if we click on a value or a column, a new chart will show up with filtered data. In the previous video, we learned that Highcharts can work with only a few and specific data formats. In this video, we are going to take a look at the drill down module in Highcharts. Sometimes we need to work with data that is not only categorical but also hierarchical. Drilling down, or filtering, helps digging one or more level deeper within our set of data. We will look at a basic column chart and then extend with drill down to connect multiple categories of data sets. At the end, we will add an extra option to apply more control of our drill down module. Let's look at how this looks like with a Highcharts example. Let's go to highcharts.com/demo/. Scroll down and choose Basic Column. And from the left menu, click on Column with Drill Down. When you click on a category column, it appears and reveals a new set of columns. And then, when you click on the back button, this set disappears and the previous one shows up. As you can see, drilling down within charts is handy when we deal with categories of data which can be further ordered into subcategories. This is all handled by Highcharts drill down module, and this is what we will use. In order to get started with the drill down module, let's open our Highcharts drilldown.html in our code editor. Go to where highcharts.js is included and paste this line of code under that. This imports from a remote source, which requires connection to the internet. So if we need to work offline, we can download all the Highcharts.js files to our local directory and refer to those in our file. Let's take a look at our Highcharts options of this HTML. We have a simple column chart here. In our example, we want to see the statistics of a company's mobile website usage. We have the data here for iOS user number, Android users, and Windows Phone users. In this case, we not only want to see whether people use Android, iOS, or Windows Phone devices, but also which OS version. In our chart, we expect to be able to click on a column to see more information about the usage of that OS. In the commented part, we can find the extra data which was previously gathered in its proper order for the drill down. Uncomment this block by erasing the opening comment tag at line 59 and the closing comment tag at line 87. Now, let's see what's going on here. As you can see, we have a general array of data for the series. If we want to hook a category to a drill down subcategory, we need to assign a drill down reference to each series. After the name and value parameter, we add the drill down identifier. Each series within the drill down needs a back referencing ID to its parent category. As you can see, the drill down ID value for the iOS users must be identical to its parent's category's drill down reference, which is iOS in our example. We can also add a name to it, which we can see on the column tooltip before its value. The data array provides the name and value pair of the subcategory elements. Now, we have our categories and their drill down categories. After saving our file, we can switch to our browser and open the HTML file we have just saved. If you click on a column anywhere, a new set of columns shows up. There is a back button on the upper right corner, and if we click on it, the chart changes back to its original view. If you want to change the text on the back button to something else, or if you want to translate it, you can do that. Let's go back to the code editor and find this line. Drill up text. Change the drill up text value to whatever you want. Save your document, go back to your browser, and hit refresh. You see, the button has changed. Great work! In this video, we have learnt how categories of data categories can be represented in Highcharts with the drill down module by connecting categories with drill down attributes. We also changed the button text by adjusting a language option. In the next video, we will look at how Highcharts can use CSV, XML, or JSON as a data source. In the previous video, we learned how to connect a chart series with a subset of data series with the drill down module of Highcharts. In this video, we are going to take a look at how we can get data from external sources, such as CSV, XML, or JSON. In each variation, we set up the basic chart options first, then do an AJAX call for the data, pass the data, and add them in the proper format to the options. For the first example, let's create a CSV file containing some data. If you're not familiar with the meaning of CSV format, it's a simple text file where the variables are separated by commas or semicolons, and each values are usually encapsulated by double quotes. CSV is an acronym for comma-separated values. The first line will be assigned later to the x-axis, and the first element of each row, after the first row, will be the name for the series. Save this file in the same directory as your example HTML. Name this file data.csv. Now we can start creating our first example chart. In our examples, first, we define a variable for the options of a basic column chart. We assign a class, where the chart will render to, set the type, title, and empty array for the x-axis, which will be processed and filled later. A title and an empty array for the series, which will also be added later from our CSV. After setting these, we call jQuery's method in order to load the CSV file's content. When the data is loaded, we start to process the data line by line. But first, we tell the CSV processing function that our lines separated or ended with line ending. As we saw before, the first line of the CSV contains the categories of our chart, so we need to process and push them. And if we further process the data, we can assign the first item of each row to the name of the data series, and the rest of the items of the row is added by the push function to the series data. I also added a line of code to see the preview chart's title, which will reflect the data format we're using. It's good for checking yourself and if we try all three methods in one file. As you can see, we finish our importing process by assigning the options object to a new Highcharts instance. This is how we execute Highcharts after we process our external data. Let's see how it looks when rendered in the browser. You can also see the CSV suffix we added to the title. Now that we have learned in what steps an outside data source is handled, we just need to adjust our data processing method when working with other data source formats like XML. Let's switch to the code editor. Before adding the XML source within the jQuery get method, I block comment the jQuery get open brackets data.csv part in our code, since we do not want both CSV and XML processing to run simultaneously. Now, let's open the XML file, which is provided with this video, called data.xml. Here is a similar set of data that was in the CSV, but in XML format. You can change the naming convention until you keep your XML valid. I just prepared it this way so that it will be easier to associate with the chart properties. When working with XML, we have an easier job than with CSV when associating XML data to our series, since categories and series have their own markup. So after we load the XML into a variable, we process the category items here by selecting and pushing to the x-axis categories array. After that, we process the series one by one, with getting the name here and add it as the series options name. And then we process the related data points value by getting them from the XML data point node and pushing them to the series options dataset. In the following line, we add these to the chart's option variable, add a suffix to the chart's title, and create a new Highcharts instance with our recently processed options. Save the file and open it in your browser to see it working. It's pretty much no surprise that we have just managed to process an XML file and display the data with Highcharts. Now, let's see quickly how a simple JSON processing looks like. Block comment the jQuery get open bracket single quote data.xml single quote close bracket part. Now, let's open our data.json file. This is a very simple example with an array of data of name-value pairs. Now, let's switch to our HTML and see how easy it is to process this JSON data. We are using jQuery's getJSON method to load our data. Next, we assign the loaded JSON array to our dataset of the options series. And then we add our JSON suffix to the title text. And finally, we create a new Highcharts chart with our options and save our work. If we need to automatically update our chart from this source every 5 seconds, we can set the setInterval method to our AJAX request. If we switch to the browser and reload, please note that in all these examples, data was loaded from the same server, same domain. Later in this section, we will look at how we can get cross-domain data with JSONP technique. In this video, we have created examples of getting and processing data from a CSV, XML, and JSON source by pre-processing the data for the charts options series before rendering it with Highcharts. In the next video, we will look at how Highcharts can handle and display different data formats. In the previous video, we learned how to process data from different data source formats like CSV, XML, and JSON. In this video, we are going to take a look at how date can be formatted when dealing with time series charts. We will try default timestamp handling. We will assign the time-date format to the x-axis. And finally, we will display the value of the x-axis differently in the label. In order to see the default timestamp handling method of Highcharts, let's open Highcharts date format.html. This time, it is a spline chart. Because if we use lots of data elements, it's easier to represent the data in a spline type rather than columns. The maximum number of dataset depend on the width of the chart. I suggest having at least 5 pixels between each point, so that the number of maximum data elements should be more than the width of the chart in pixel divided by 5. We add type to x-axis within the options. This tells Highcharts to associate the first x value of the data array as the default date time. Under this, we add the series name and data. In this case, for data, we use the array of arrays format. In each array, the first value will be associated with the x-axis point value, and the second with the y-axis. There's a rule to know. Highcharts can automatically handle axis labeling only if the data is in timestamp format with milliseconds. If we want to use Unix timestamp format, we need to know that Highcharts uses timestamps with milliseconds. So if we use timestamps of seconds values, multiply them by 1000. For example, 2015 08 10 is 1407621600 as a Unix timestamp. But Highcharts will accept this. Basically, you have to multiply the Unix timestamp by 1000. The default labels of the x-axis generated by Highchart might suit us, but sometimes we want different format. This is when we need to use the date format method, which converts a timestamp format to a customized date format. We add this to the labels as a formatter. It accepts 3 parameters: formatting options, a JavaScript time value that you want to convert, and a Boolean. Whether you want to convert value in capitals. The format used is a subset of the formats provided by PHP's strftime function. Let's see some of the format values can be used. Let's go to php.net/manual/en/function.strftime.php. As you can see, %b as the abbreviation of the month name. %e as the day of the month, and %Y stands for the year. Going back to our label formatter in our code, we use the function to get the current label's value, convert it, and return it to the x-axis. Let's see how it works. Hit save and open your browser. Hit refresh, and now you can see that the labels below the x-axis are formatted as we wanted. You can change the format to whatever you want. Just remember to provide the timestamp format for Highcharts. In this video, we have learned about Highcharts' default timestamp format, how different it is from standard Unix timestamp. Next, we utilize the datetime type for the x-axis, which allowed us to automatically assign the timestamp format to the x-axis. Finally, we have learned how the label format method can convert from timestamp to any other readable date and time format to show it as the x-axis label. In the next video, we will look at an example of Highcharts processing data from a database. We will set up a simple backend file to collect the material and generate data for the chart. Hello and welcome to video 5.5, Getting Data from a Database. In the previous video, we looked at how Highcharts handles date formats and how we can convert timestamps to any date format. In this video, we are going to take a look at why Highcharts needs a backend file to query data from a database. Then, we will plan to create that backend file for that purpose. Finally, generate the HTML and JavaScript for Highcharts. Highcharts is, by default, only on client side, which means it cannot directly connect to backend systems. In order to get data from a database, we need to plan and create a backend file. In order to create this example, we are going to use server-side scripting language, PHP, and a database, MySQL. These can be installed locally, like my example. If you don't have it, just follow my explanation. We will use a database called weather, and it can be preloaded to your SQL databases from the Highcharts weather.sql file. If you've loaded the database file with your favorite method, let's go to the next step and see how our backend file is set up. Let's open Highcharts data database.php file in our code editor. The basic setup is that we connect our database and query our weather data. Our example contains a sample of London's daily low and high temperature for the last 7 days. Since there are 2 temperature values for one date, we will need 2 series for the high and low temperature values, and a set of values for the x-axis in our chart. This is why we'll create an array of values for each series, and one for the categories of the x-axis. Here, we process our query result by looping through the fetched database records and splitting them into 3 arrays, the corresponding values. We end up with 3 arrays, the low temperatures, high temperatures, and the category array with the date values. Now we have 3 arrays which need to be prepared for JavaScript. So we use PHP's JSON encode function to do this for us, and store the encoded arrays in variables for later use in Highcharts. We finished our query within our PHP, so here we can free the memory and close the connection. Next, we have a simple line chart prepared, and we need to add the previously prepared values to the categories and series data. Let's go to the x-axis option and add our prepared data to the categories by echoing it through PHP. As we said earlier, we have 2 series, one for the high temperature values and one for the low values. Let's scroll through the low series where we can assign the data. Let's echo our PHP variable with the low value array. Now we can add the high temp values array by echoing the high value PHP array. We can also make the high series line red by adding color. Now, let's preview how it looks like. Let's open the browser and call the file on our local server. As you can see, there are two lines for the high and low temperature, with the date values we assigned as the x-axis categories. In this video, we have queried the database, created arrays from the results, and associated them with the chart series and x-axis. In the next video, we will look at how Highcharts can receive and process data from a different server. Hi there, this is the last video of this section, entitled Getting Data Across Domains with JSON-P. In the previous video, we looked at an example of how data can be accessed from a database with PHP and MySQL, and prepared for the right HTML and JavaScript for Highcharts. In this video, we are going to take a look at getting data from cross-domain and make it usable for Highcharts. Before doing all the work, we need to first understand why we need a special technique for getting data from a different domain. Later, we will look at how a simple JSON service looks like. And finally, we get, process, and create a chart with the data from the JSON-P service. Sometimes we need to work with data that is not on our server, but on a different domain. Generally, browsers do not allow to access data from other than own domains due to the same origin policy, which is a security concept in the world of web applications. There is one method we can use, called JSON-P. This is a technique which allows us to make an AJAX request to a server and receive it in such a way that it is allowed by the same origin policy. The JSON data is executed through callback function on the remote domain. Let's look at a JSON-P service set up by opening jsonp.php file in your code editor. As you can see, this is a very simple JSON-P service. In the first line, we tell that this should be handled as a JSON response. Then we have a set of values in an array which will be used as the dataset of the charts series. And finally, we convert it to a JSON object, wrap it in a callback function, and display it. Now, let's open our Highcharts jsonp.html in our code editor. As we can see, this is a sample spline type chart, where we need the data values of the series from the remote resource. We are using one of jQuery's AJAX methods again, the getJSON method. Before using the getJSON method, we need to tell the URL of the remote source, and we need to call the callback parameter we set up in our PHP. The rest of the process is similar to any other JSON methods. We assign the received data to our series data, and finally create the chart with the options. Let's have a look at it in our browser. As you can see, working with cross-domain data is similar to when data is locally served. We just needed to introduce the JSON-P method for it. In this section, we have learned about the same origin security policy and applied the JSON-P technique, which allows us to use alongside with the security policy. We received and processed data from a different domain. By the end of this section, we have learned about what data formats Highcharts can handle as series data source. We created charts where a subset of charts can be called by using the drilling down module of Highcharts. Next, we tried how CSV, XML and JSON can be pre-processed to be used for series data and x-axis categories. We also learned that Highcharts can convert timestamp values to multiple date formats. And then we created a backend file to query and sort data from a database and prepare the HTML and JavaScript for Highcharts. And finally, we tried an example where we worked with data from a different domain. In the next section, we take advantage of Highcharts' user interaction features, focusing on how to handle input from the user, specifically, how to handle different events that are fired within a chart. Join me there. Hello and welcome to Section 6, User Interaction. In the previous section, Highcharts can read different data formats and fetch data from different sources. In this section, we will learn how to handle input from the user, specifically, how to handle different events that are fired within a chart. We'll learn about zoomable charts, master detail charts, chart annotation, and dynamic tooltips. Now we move on to the first video of this section that teaches us how a chart can become zoomable. When working with a large collection of data, we need means to get a portion of data in focus. One way of doing this is zooming in and out on the data drawn out by Highcharts. In this video, we are going to take a look at how easily X direction zooming can be turned on in the chart options. Later, we try zooming in the Y direction, and finally, we try both X and Y directional zooming. First, we need to set up a basic Highcharts page. Let's open highcharts-zoom.html. For this example, we are using a column chart. We also have a large set of data, so we can make use of the zooming feature in the next step. Adding the zooming feature is as simple as adding this one line to the chart property. Add zoom type X on line 17. Now save your file and open it in your browser. You see a lot of data along the X-axis. Now try selecting some part with your mouse horizontally. While selecting, you see the selected area with different background color. You can also further zoom in. And then hit Reset Zoom if you want to go back to the original position. Now, let's go back to the code editor. Let's change the zoom type from the X to the Y direction. Save the file and open it in the browser. Refresh the page and try selecting the upper part of the chart vertically. This is how the Y direction looks like. And finally, let's go back to see what happens if you change the zoom type to XY. Let's switch back to the browser. Reload the page with our new settings. Try selecting any part diagonally. Notice, if you try zooming in as much as you can, Highcharts makes sure you cannot overzoom the chart. It will show some data parts anyway. This is why we like working with Highcharts. In this video, we have learned how a chart can be zoomable to all directions, with the help of adding a single line of code to the chart settings. In the next video, we will look at how a details and overall panel can be shown in the same graph. In the previous video, we learned how a chart with a large set of data can be made zoomable. In this video, we are going to take a look at how master details charts are made. Sometimes we work with large sets of chronological data that needs to be analyzed in a way that also a zoomed part and the overall data can be seen on top of each other. This is called a master details graph. Creating a master details graph will require two Highcharts instances connected with a callback function. First, we set up a master chart and later a detail chart. In order to understand the main steps of our work, let's have a look at how master detail selection works in the browser. Open up the highcharts-master-details-preview.html file in the browser. As you can see, this bottom part is the main chart with 0-100 selected and highlighted, and zoomed on the top in the detailed chart. This part at the bottom with a grey background is the unselected part. If we select a different part here, the upper, detailed chart is updated accordingly. So the main concept is to set up a main chart, an event handler for selecting from the main chart and updating the detail chart. Let's start our work by opening highcharts-master-details.html file in our code editor. In our example, we defined a variable for our data, which has values as an array of multiple arrays. And here, we have variables for the master and details chart for later use. Here's the createMaster function, which sets up our master charts option, and this will tell it how to behave on selection. This master chart has many options. Let me show you some specific ones. Since we have little space for the main chart, we do not need a title neither for this chart nor for the X or Y axis. This part shows how to set up what is going to be seen initially on the X-axis when the chart is loaded. Plot bands part. Actually, these are the unselected parts which have the grey background. Here you can see some detailed options set up, which I cannot list all, but you can have a look in your own copy. As for the data for the series, it comes from the data variable we declared earlier. At the end of this function, we create the chart and assign the options we have just set up. You could ask, how is the detail chart updated with these options? Well, in Highcharts, there is an option for event handling, and it needs to be included to the chart settings defined here. I'll paste this part of the code here, and this handles the selection on the master chart, redraws the unselected, masking part, and passes the updated series data for the detailed chart with the detail data array. Now, let's proceed to the detailed chart setup. This is also generated with a callback function referencing to the master chart. This starts with defining the start and endpoints for the initial chart view. After that, we create the detailed chart within the detailed chart variable we defined earlier. Some special options for the details chart related to a normal chart, the absolute positioning above the master chart here, and later the referencing detailed data which is updated by the master chart event handler. Finally, after the createDetail function, we create the master and detail chart containers and add some styling, positioning, and append them to our main container. We then fire the createMaster function to draw the charts. Optionally, we can add a custom reset button, since Highcharts doesn't have a default solution for this. Wow, we've achieved a lot in such a short time, don't you think? In this video, we have learned how two charts, a master and a detail chart, can interact by selecting a portion of data on the master, which triggers an update of the selection on the details chart. In the next video, we will look at how we can annotate on a chart with Highcharts. Hello, this is a video on chart annotation. In the previous video, we learned how to create a master and detailed chart variation of Highcharts. In this video, we are going to take a look at how we can click and annotate charts on the fly in 3 steps. First, we add a text area where users can add their text as annotation. Second, we collect the data or text from the text area. Third, we add a box of text with the text received from the text area. Let's open up highcharts-annotation.html in our code editor. In this powerful example of ours, we use a general spline chart and 2 extra things. First, we add a text area with some styling after the container. Then, we define and construct an event that needs to be fired after adding text in the text area and clicking on the chart. For this reason, we separate the event options in a variable at the beginning of the script. This annotate chart function starts with creating variables for the XY coordinates, the text for the box on the chart, a variable for the box, and one for the content of the text area. Next, we collect the coordinates from the event of clicking on the chart. And the next part deals with the collection of text from the text area and adding its value and the coordinates to the text variable. Next, we create the annotation box on the chart and empty the annotation text area. Finally, we hook this into the charts option as an event handler. Save this work and let's open it in a browser and see it working. Now, let's type our first note into this text area. Then click on the chart to add to it. Now click back to the text area. Add text. And click on the chart to add a new notation with the text you've just typed. It looks like we did a good job, and it works as it's supposed to work. Excellent! In this video, we have built a chart with a dynamic notation feature. In the next video, we will have a look at how to create interactive tooltips in Highcharts. Hi there, this is the Dynamic Tooltips video. In the previous video, we looked at how we can click and annotate charts on the fly in a few steps. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can make a tooltip interactive. In our interesting example here, we're going to put a button on a tooltip which, on click, removes the point selected. In order to get this result, first, we need to get the value of the point we click. Then, we get the index reference of that point, and finally, we remove that point by clicking on the button on that tooltip. There are cases in real life when we need to add interactivity into a chart's tooltip. Generally, Highcharts' default tooltip option doesn't allow this kind of interactivity, so we'll create this feature. Let's open Highcharts' dynamic tooltip.html in our favorite code editor. We have a simple chart from one of our previous examples. We add a button element to the tooltip. We assign the point's X position as the remove data element of the button. Next, we need an event that fires when we click on a point. Let's add events to the charts option. In this function, first, we need to get the value of the button's X value by retrieving it by the button's remove data attribute. After this, we get the index of this value, since we need to remove the points by its index. And here, we remove this point by its index reference. Finally, we redraw the chart with the previous element removed. And we're done with our work. Let's open our file in the browser to see how it works. Now, when you select a point and click on the Remove Point button, the selected point is removed and the chart gets smoothly redrawn. If you refresh the page, all the removed points will be visible, since in our case, we didn't save the new dataset after point removals. See how easy it is to add interactive feature to the tooltips in Highcharts? Pretty incredible, isn't it? So, to wrap up this section, we have learned about some of the interactive possibilities of Highcharts, such as zooming, master detail graph, annotation, and dynamic tooltips. We have learnt that a simple zooming option can add a useful interactive feature to complex charts. We also learned how such complex charts can be represented in a master detail graphs mode. Later, we learnt how annotations can be added to Highcharts. And finally, we added dynamic interaction feature to tooltips. In the next section, we take a look at chart sharing possibilities of Highcharts, like exporting a chart as an image, emailing, or printing. Join me there. Hello and welcome to section 7, called Sharing Charts on the Web. The previous section focused on how to handle input from the user within a Highchart. In this section, we'll learn how we can set up our own Highcharts exporting service to export charts in different formats. Next, we look at an example how this generated image can be sent through email. Later, we look at how we can share dynamic charts, and finally, we'll study Highcharts printing options. Now we move on to the first video of this section that teaches us how we can export images to different formats. When working with a large collection of data, we need means to get a portion of data in focus. One way of doing this is zooming in and out on the data drawn out by Highcharts. In this video, we're going to create a chart on which if we click a button, we send data through Ajax to an image exporting service driven by Phantom.js. This is why we first set up a simple chart for exporting through with an Ajax call. Next, we drop a Phantom.js image converting service. And finally, we connect the previous two with a server-side PHP mechanism. As a start, we use one of the sampled charts from previous videos, and we add the exporting feature to it. Let's open highcharts-exporting.html in our code editor. It's one of the chart setup we used earlier. One important thing for this usage is to have the chart options for the chart as a variable. Next, let's have a look at the HTML part. Here we have the button for firing the image generating mechanism. After that, we have a placeholder for the preview of the generated image with some basic inline styling. So now we have a button that we'll want to be able to press to send a request somewhere, receive the link of the image, and show it in a small box. For this reason, we have this function attached to the button's click event. Here we define a JavaScript object variable, which will be used for the image generation. Here's the URL of the PHP file which connects to our image generating mechanism with this HTML. Here we convert the options to JSON. Here we can define the format. A little later we'll look at all the possible formats. Next, we pass through the chart title too. Here we added preloader animation for the better user experience. And next we have our Ajax request set up. As you can see, we send our object variable as the request's content to the Ajax function by post and send it to the URL of the PHP file we defined earlier. We have some error handling here. And next, if our Ajax request is successful, we receive the link for the image and generate the link and image tag for the image preview placeholder. Next, let's set up our converting service. The developers behind Highcharts recommend Phantom.js, a headless WebKit drop-in solution. This software will be used through command line and it can be scripted by JavaScript files. I have already prepared all necessary stack, so you should be able to find the following. You need to have a copy of Phantom.js and place it in a folder named Exporter. In the same level, there is a highchart-convert JavaScript file, which holds the commands for Phantom.js. The char-images folder will be used for generated material. The JS folder contains other necessary JS files for Phantom.js. And the TMP folder will be used for temporarily generated files. Let's assume we all have the same setup. Now, in our code editor, let's open the chart-exporter.php file, which is called from our HTML by the Ajax request. This starts with a function that is used for generating image file names for the chart's images. Here, we collect the data from the AJAX request. Next, we process the possible image types. As you can see, these are the possible values which can be set as type in our HTML's object variable. PNG is recommended since it has the smallest size for general use in web and email, but we can use other types per need. Phantom.js processes Highcharts option as a separate file, so we generate this file in our TMP folder here. Next, we convert the chart's title to a machine-friendly name. Next, we launch Phantom.js's converting service by executing a command line command. Next, we handle error. And finally, we pass back the chart image files link as we early prepared its receiving in our HTML file for preview and download. Now, let's take a look at our solution by opening highcharts-exporting.html in our browser. As you can see, we can click on the Generate Image button. The preview appears, and if you click on it, you'll get the full image in a blank browser window. In this video, we have learned how to generate chart image on our own server with AJAX technology, Phantom.js, and PHP. In the next video, we will send our generated chart to an email. Join me there. In the previous video, we learned how we can export a Highchart chart to an image file on our server. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can send the exported chart image in an email as an attachment with a PHP solution. In order to send our chart, first we need to download PHP Mailer, a mail handling PHP class. Make changes to fit our needs and add the right path to the chart image file. Sending attachments with PHP can be cumbersome if you want to program mail handling. There are popular solutions as PHP classes that focus on handling email and attachment sending in a very friendly way. That is why we'll use the PHP Mailer class. First, let's create a folder called PHP Mailer in our working directory. Now, let's go to github.com/synchro/PHP Mailer and get the zip file. Download it to our local PHP Mailer. Open the zip file and go into the PHP Mailer-master folder. Select its content and copy or extract them to the PHP Mailer folder. Now, let's browse to the examples directory inside PHP Mailer. Copy mail.phps to your root working directory, one level up from PHP Mailer. Let's rename the file to chart-phpmailer.php and open it in a code editor. In the require line, change the double period to PHP Mailer, as this is the new path for the auto-load file. Now, change the from email and name as per our needs. Let's add reply to, since in our example, the from and reply to addresses are the same. We can change the subject here. Here, we can change this line as we will need to add the HTML and text in this file, and not in an outside HTML file. Let's delete this part. Here, we can add any HTML as the body of our email. Alt body will be the simple text version of our email. And finally, we can add the path to our chart image file here. If we still have our image file exported from the previous video, we can add its path and file name for the attachment separated by a comma. After we've finished all of our changes, let's save it and run the PHP file on our local server like this. Let's open your browser and type your chart-mailer.php local URL. In my case, it's this. Once you open it, the mail sending has been done, and if you see the email has been sent message, everything went fine. Congratulations! In this video, we have learnt how the chart image can be sent with PHP Mailer as an attachment. In the next video, we will look at how we can send charts through email with dynamic functions. Hello, this is the Emailing Dynamic Charts video. In this video, we learned how to send an exported chart image as an email attachment. In this video, we are going to take a look at how we can send charts with dynamic URL parameters. If we want to read URL parameters in our HTML, we need to set up a JavaScript function first. Next, we will adjust our code to change the title of the chart. Sometimes we need to send a link to a chart with custom settings, and this is where we need dynamic chart URLs. In this example, we will use a simple chart, add a URL parameter getting function, and change the title of the chart. Let's open Highcharts sending dynamic.html in our code editor. As you can see, our JavaScript code starts with a jQuery function, which collects and returns the URL portions separated with a question mark or an equal sign, the general get parameters. Now, let's add a chart title variable with a default value. For the following, we need to examine whether a title has been set or not and change the chart title variable's value to the parameter's decoded value. Finally, we need to change the title option value of the chart to the chart title variable. Save this work and let's open it in the browser to see it working. Now, let's type question title equals custom title after our URL to see the chart change its title. Hit enter. As you can see, the title has changed according to the URL parameter. Excellent! Now you can share this custom URL in an email or anywhere on the web. In this video, we have learnt how we can add dynamic parameters to a chart through its link for sharing in email. In the next video, we will look at how we can make some custom changes for printing charts. Hi there, this is the Preparing Charts for Printing video. In the previous video, we looked at how we can create dynamic charts with URL parameters for sharing on the web. In this video, we are going to take a look at how we can set up custom chart printing. In our example, we are going to add a button for the print function, resizing the chart for printing, hiding unnecessary elements, and finally, printing the chart and resizing the chart back to its original size. You've seen earlier how Highcharts offers default printing function. In this video, we will implement a custom solution where we can define which part to print and which part from the page to omit. Let's open highcharts-printing.html in our code editor. As you can see, this is a simple chart that we've used before. Now, let's scroll down to the HTML part. Here, we can add extra HTML elements and texts that we want to be on the printed version. This is the button we'll use for printing. Here, we'll use the noPrint class on HTML elements, which we don't want to see on the printed version. Now, we need to create the printing function for the button. With our Highcharts JavaScript function, let's add this part of code. This function, attached to the button, first creates a variable for the chart for later use, hides unwanted elements, like the button itself, and every element with noPrint class. Next, we resize our chart to a custom size. In our case, it will be 1000 pixels wide and 400 pixels high. Next, we print send the visible content of the window for printing. And after waiting for 1000 milliseconds, we resize the elements and show the hidden parts as it was before. Let's open our file in the browser to see how it works. Let's try printing the chart. As you can see, if you click on the Print Chart button, the unwanted elements hide and the printing window pops up. In this example, we'll just check the printing preview and, as you can see, the button and the unwanted text is not on the page. We did a good job, don't you agree? In this section, we have focused on how we can prepare Highcharts for sharing on the web. We have created a local image exporting service for exporting charts in different formats. We learned how we can send an exported chart as an image as an email attachment. Later, we looked at how charts can be sent with dynamic URL parameters. And finally, we added a custom printing function to our chart. In the next section, we'll examine how to deploy Highcharts into mobile platforms with a web mobile framework. See you there. Hello and welcome to section 8, called Highcharts on Mobile Platforms. The previous section helped us on how we can export, distribute charts through email, and how to prepare charts for printing. In this section, we will learn how we can set up mobile-friendly web pages with jQuery Mobile and integrate Highcharts with it. This section starts with a brief introduction to the jQuery Mobile framework. This is followed by a video where we learn about jQuery Mobile's basic page structure and how they are linking to each other. Later, we integrate Highcharts with jQuery Mobile in our example. Finally, we look at how drilling down, point and click, and pinch features work in our jQuery Mobile web app. Now, let's start learning a little about jQuery Mobile. So far, we used Highcharts in desktop browsers. Although Highcharts integrates very well with all platforms and browsers supporting HTML and JavaScript, such devices are Android, iPhone, or Windows Phone. We haven't really designed a mobile-focused page. In this video, we will look at why jQuery Mobile is a good framework to choose for a mobile web project. We'll use jQuery Mobile because it provides an interface and theming that most developers can understand and can use. It's fast, and it will work on most mobile devices. Or if not, it's not broken, but less features or animations are shown. Now, let's look at the key features of the framework. First, it's built on jQuery Core, which means if you're familiar with jQuery, you'll get along a lot easier. The next feature is what all developers love. It's compatible with all major mobile, tablet, e-reader, and desktop platforms. Its feature is that it's lightweight and fast. It's HTML5 markup driven, which means faster development and less scripting. It supports responsive design, allowing our pages to automatically scale to the screen size. Another important feature is its Ajax-powered navigation system, which enables page transitions and such features that make our web app feel like a native mobile app. The touch and mouse event support handles the user input with a simple API. Unified UI widgets are used for common touch-based themable control interfaces. And finally, its theming framework and theme roller application allows developers to build highly branded experiences with ease. Now, let's see how a jQuery Mobile's page HTML structure looks like. Let's open the jQuery Mobile sample.html file in our favorite code editor. In the head, a meta viewport tag sets the screen width to the pixel width of the device and references to jQuery. jQuery Mobile and the style sheet from the CDN adds all the styles and scripts. In the body, this div with a data role of page is the wrapper used to specify a page, and the header bar and content region are added inside to create a basic page in our example. These data attributes are HTML5 attributes used throughout jQuery Mobile to transform basic markup into an enhanced and styled widget. Inside your content container, you can add any standard HTML elements like headings, lists, paragraphs, etc. This is how a very basic page looks like with jQuery Mobile. In this video, we got to know the basic concepts of jQuery Mobile and had a look at a basic HTML structure of it. In the next video, we will dive into the details of the page structure and see how pages are linked together. See you there! Hello and welcome to the jQuery Mobile Standard Structure video tutorial. The previous video was a brief introduction to jQuery Mobile. In this video, we are going to start taking a closer look at jQuery Mobile's page anatomy. We will add more pages to our sample mobile app and learn how these pages can be linked together. Finally, we'll study how we can add a back button through a simple markup, which adds similar behavior to the page, such as the browser's back button functionality. Let's open jQuery Mobile Pages.html in our code editor. As you can see, this is a standard HTML5 page. jQuery Mobile uses this viewport meta information to tell the browser not to scale the website when opening the page, and to let the content fill the full width of the device. Next, we load jQuery Mobile's style sheet from the CDN. Since this framework strongly relies on jQuery, we also need to load one of jQuery's recent versions, and jQuery Mobile's minified JavaScript itself too. Okay, let's see this page setup. This div with data role page stands as a container for our mobile page. This holds the header, content, and footer part of the page. These attributes not only give behavior, but also presentational characteristics. These parts are optional, but using them is a good convention. In jQuery Mobile, a single HTML document may contain multiple pages by having multiple page attribute divs, but with different IDs. Now, let's copy and paste our page div. As I said before, if we have multiple pages within one HTML, we need to add a unique ID to the page divs. Let's add page 1 as ID to the first one and page 2 to the second one. I also make changes in the second page's content so that when we test it, and we see the difference. Let's open this HTML in the browser. As you can see, only the first page's content is loaded. But how do we show the second one? Let's go back to our code. Let's add code on the left to the first page's content. jQuery Mobile uses hash and the ID to link internal pages. This markup will create the standard UI button list for buttons. Now add page 1 button to the second page. Let's save our file and open it in our browser. Now that our page is linked, we can click and load the other page, page 2, and page 1. Since we go to page 2 and then back, we might just need a back linking or back button functionality on this page. jQuery Mobile has a standard feature for handling the back navigation. Let's switch back to code view. Let's find the link where we backlink page 1 within page's content. Let's erase the anchor value and add data-rel to the link, and also add data-role button. You can also change the link text. This tells the anchor to look like a button and to behave like it's going back one step in the browser's history. Let's save and switch back to the browser and refresh the page to see our back button's behavior. Click on page 2 and here click on the back link. Repeat it again to see it's working like a charm. As you can see, this mimics the browser's back button function as we expected. Good job! In the next video, we'll learn about integrating Highcharts and jQuery mobile. Hello, this is the Integrating Highcharts and jQuery mobile video. In the previous video, we learned about the standard page structure of jQuery mobile. In this video, we are going to integrate jQuery mobile with Highcharts. This integration takes 3 steps. First, we set up a 2-page mobile web app with jQuery mobile. Second, we add 2 different charts for both pages' content part. Third, we are going to trigger the chart load on each page load. Let's start our task by opening the jQuery mobile highcharts.html in our code editor. This code is the continuation of the code from the previous video, where we created a standard 2-page mobile page. It has some extra scripts at the bottom of the page, but we'll cover it later. Now, let's extend this code by adding the Highcharts JavaScript file in the head right after loading jQuery mobile. In our case, we'll use Highcharts server. Next, we'll add the chart containers to each page content. Add div ID container 1 to page 1's content and div ID container 2 close angle bracket. Closer to the bottom of the page, we can see that the 2 charts data options are set up. I just want to call your attention to this line. We will create our first chart on the first page load, or right after the page transition animation has finished. We are using a slightly different approach for loading chart 2 on page 2. Let's scroll down and we can see that we have our options in a variable. Here, we first set up all the options separately. And we can trigger the generating of the second chart here when showing page 2. Now, we can check if this works in our browser. If you have remote hosting somewhere, you can also copy your file over FTP to your hosting and open it in your mobile phone's browser. As you can see, the chart is generated right after each page is loaded, or after the animation. During this video, we integrated Highcharts and jQuery mobile with a multi-page solution in a few simple steps. In the next video, we will improve our mobile web's charts for testing the drilling down module and the point and click and pinch mobile gestures. Hello, this is the gestures drilling down point and click pinch video. In the previous video, we integrated Highcharts with jQuery mobile in a multi-page setting. In this video, we are going to take a look at how Highcharts supports gestures in mobile environment. In this example, first, we will enable the drilling down module. Next, we enable zooming. Finally, we will try the point and click and pinch gestures on our mobile device. Let's open jQuery mobile Highcharts gestures.html in our code editor. In another tab, open Highcharts-drilldown.html file. We'll use the drill down part as a copy-paste. In our previous drill down example file, let's select the Highcharts option setup, including the drill down part, and copy it. Switch to the jQuery mobile Highcharts gestures.html and paste our code into the first charts option. select this previous option and paste the other. In order to use the drill down feature, we need to include the module in the head. Let's scroll down and paste this line after we load the highcharts.js. Let's save our file and open it in our browser. As mentioned before, if you can, copy your remote web space and open it on your mobile's browser. As you can see, the drilling down feature also works in our mobile solution. Click on a column and a detailed view is shown, and you can go back too. Now, let's add zooming option in our code. Let's switch back to our code view. Now, we need to enable point and view and pinching gestures by allowing zooming of the chart. Let's add zoom type XY here on line 61 and 144. Hit save, and let's check these features in our mobile or desktop browser. Let's try point and click by touching a point. See, it shows the point info. Now, using 2 or more fingers, we can pinch and zoom the chart. If you zoomed in, you can switch back to the original view by hitting the back button. We can also check the other chart on page 2, since enabled the gesture for that too. It looks like we did everything well. In this section, we have focused on integrating Highcharts with a mobile framework, jQuery Mobile. We have taken part in a short introduction of jQuery Mobile. Next, we looked at the standard structure of a jQuery Mobile page. Later, we created a multi-page mobile chart web app by integrating Highcharts and jQuery Mobile. In our last video, we tried some of the common gestures with our mobile chart. In this course, we started studying Highcharts from the beginning, and by the end of the course, we have learned some very advanced techniques. I hope you enjoyed learning together. I'm sure you can use these methods to perfect your web or mobile app with a modern chart experience by using Highcharts in some ways. If you want to start learning JQ Mobile from the beginning, go to learn.jQuery.com/jQuery-mobile/getting-started and read through this step-by-step tutorial. And don't forget to check out the API reference at api.jQueryMobile.com. If you want something more to read with practical examples, Pact Publishing right now offers at least 4 books about jQuery Mobile at www.pactpub.com. Thank you and keep learning. Goodbye.